Good afternoon to you all. I'd like to welcome you to today's emergency briefing on the situation in Turkey and Syria, hosted by the Australian International Development Network, or what we call AIDN, in partnership with the Emergency Action Alliance. My name is Simon Lewis. I am chair of AIDN, and I'd like to start off by acknowledging that I'm joining you here from Wurundjeri country on the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and I invite you to share where you are joining from in the chat function today. So AIDN was set up 5 years ago to build stronger connections, awareness, alignment and action among the Australian donors and impact investors that are focused beyond our shores. We're a chapter committee of Philanthropy Australia, and our mission is to promote more embedded international giving and impact investing from Australians to benefit these communities. And we do so through the development of guides and podcasts, webinars and conference engagements as we continue to build out this network. Today's emergency briefing is an important part of what we do, allowing us to come together as a concerned community to get in closer with the situation on the ground, with those organizations leading the effort and leading the support, and to establish how we can best offer our financial assistance. I'd just like to acknowledge the devastation of the situation in Turkey and Syria continues to unfold, and we stand by the diaspora of affected families and friends around the world, those who are in Australia, and also indeed those who may be on today's call with us today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Kerren Morris, who leads the Emergency Action Alliance today. Kerren will be facilitating today's discussion with some of Australia's leading organisations providing that relief effort, and she'll give you some background to the AIA and why this initiative is so important for us to provide that coordinated support to these emergency situations. I just would like to let all attendees know that this is being recorded, today's session is being recorded, and that we hope to follow up with all attendees and including in our newsletter, the AIDN newsletter going out shortly after, specific ways that you can offer your support with a set of, lists of funds and sort of initiatives that the EAA and its members are running to benefit Turkey and Syria. So thank you very much, Kerren. Over to you.
Great, thank you, Simon, and thank you to the AID network for creating this opportunity to brief you on the emergency situation in Turkey and Syria, where our members are already providing life-saving assistance. We'll also talk about what help is needed. So what help is needed right now to save lives. So I'm joined today by a panel of experts and leaders in humanitarian disaster response, and we'll be hearing from Racha, Nasreddine, from ActionAid. She's joining us from Amman. David Sims, who's the Director of Programs and Operations at Care Australia. Lisa Upton, who's the Head of Communications and Public Affairs at Australia for UNHCR. And Matthew Maury, who's the CEO of Tearfund Australia, and he's also the Chair of the Emergency Action Alliance. He'll be talking about why collaborating in this way leads to greater impact. So the situation that we are hearing about in the news is hard to comprehend. Already 20,000 people have lost their lives, and this number is likely to continue to rise. A second disaster is looming now, with a lack of medical assistance, a lack of shelter, food and clean water. In freezing winter conditions, many more lives are going to be at risk. So we all want to do something to help, and sometimes we can feel a bit helpless. And it can be hard to know what the best way is to help in a disaster of this scale. And actually, it's for emergencies just like this one, of such unthinkable gravity and scale, that the Emergency Action Alliance was created. Our 15 members, each of whom are leading Australian aid organisations, all agree that when disasters like this take place, we can have greater impact if we work together. So we launch a central appeal, and with the support of our media partners, we let the public know that this is the best way to help. It's an incredibly efficient model that enables us to raise more funds than we would do if we acted individually. And those funds are distributed only to the member organisations who are on the ground working with their partners in response to this emergency. And the distribution is very rapid. So just the top line summary of that, we raise more money, we get it to where it's needed most. We do that very quickly, and so we help more people and have greater impact. This week, we rapidly launched an appeal for the Turkey-Syria emergency, and we have been heartened by the strong response from the everyday Australian public. This model is well established across Europe. This is not a brand new idea. One of the biggest equivalent alliances to Emergency Action Alliance is the Disasters Emergency Committee in the UK. It has been running centralised appeals like this for decades. And recently they raised £400 million for the Ukraine emergency. So many of our fellow alliances have now launched central appeals for the Turkey and Syria emergency. And whilst this model is new in Australia, we're well supported by our fellow alliances. They provide us with a lot of advice, ways of working, and ways of ensuring success of our appeals. So Racha, if I can hand over to you, I hope that you might be able to give us a sense of what it's like at the moment on the ground, what you're hearing from your partners, what is the current status of this emergency.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having me today. So the situation is really difficult on the ground. As you know, like the earthquake, it's like this is hit Turkey, southern Turkey, and northwest Syria, in addition to some areas in coastal and central Syria. Up till now, we know that the death toll is 21,000 people and around 71,000 injured between Syria and Turkey, of course. Rescue workers are still racing against time to pull people from under the rubble. Unfortunately, in Syria, they are less equipped, so people are using very basic equipment and their bare hands to get people out of the rubble. Just 2 days ago, our partners managed to rent few equipment and also contribute to rescuing children and women from under the rubble in northwest Syria. So the situation in Syria is more difficult, I guess. Of course, Turkey is completely devastated by this earthquake, because what we have been hearing from partners also and people who work in Turkey, that major cities have been completely destroyed. Like, for example, Antakya in the south of Turkey, the city has been completely destroyed. There are barely like few buildings, and people are like in temporary shelters or have been displaced into other areas. I can focus more, I guess, on Syria, because this is where ActionAid has started its response 3 days ago. And just to give you the bigger picture from of northwest Syria, the area there is hosts 4.2 million population. Majority are children and women. These have been through multiple displacement, and the area has been strained by conflict and attacks for the past 12 years. So it's a conflict area, already facing a lot of hard conditions. There is a harsh weather conditions. It is winter. It's really cold, and there was there still is a cholera outbreak in the area. So the area was already suffering, and this earthquake just came to exacerbate the suffering of the people there. And this is why the northwest Syria requires extra support, because it is already struggling with a lot. I can say maybe in our response, we focus more on women and girls and on young people. Fortunately, young people in the area have been, and people that we work with, our local partners, have been at the front lines, either with the search and rescue or with equipping temporary shelters for people. Because in northwest Syria, many people have basically were living on the streets for the past couple of days. There is lack of tents in the area, so local organizations who are responding, including our partners, starting opening up temporary shelters like schools or unused buildings, and equipping it with blankets, floor mats, food, water, heating, so that people can use it. Of course, in these conditions, women and girls will be more affected, and they are at risk at more violence and abuse. There is also what has been reported for us, a lot of the women safe spaces were destructed because we run a lot of women safe spaces in the area, because as I said, the area was already an area that had a humanitarian response and is an area in need. But these facilities were destructed. Health facilities and maternity clinics were also destroyed or damaged. So women and girls have limited access to these services, and this is adding, exposing them more and adding to their suffering. I'll give another example. For example, pregnant women now are at risk of further complications. Menstruating girls who don't have access to the right products to manage their periods, or who don't have access to their safe spaces because they are currently in temporary shelters. Large number of people in these shelters. So question of privacy is it's at the table, and then also as I said, there is a huge risk of violence, of abuse and discrimination against women. Majority of the women, for example, affected in the earthquake in Northwest Syria are head of households, because as you know, the war affected their families. They have lost their husbands in war, so they are and now they are at risk of losing their livelihoods. So that's again double the suffering. If you look at it like generally, what are the basic needs currently? And in terms of our immediate response, it was basically to support in the search and rescue in the first couple of days, because as I said, there are still people who are under the rubble, and there are still some hope that some people can get out alive. So that's number one thing that we did, is to supply our partners with the resources to rent equipment inside Syria. In Turkey, there isn't this problem, because it's a big country and they are well equipped, and they have received a lot of international support in terms of mission to aid and rescue. Another need is the shelters. As I said, there is lack of tents, but temporary shelters have been opened. There is a need for more, of course, to equip more shelters. Like also, they are using mosques, for example, as well for shelters. And how you need to equip these shelters with heating, with food, with blankets. There is lack of electricity, so you need also electricity. Health facilities, as I said, were destructed, so we are also starting mobile clinics and for first aid, and also trying to support existing clinics with fuel so that they can continue to operate. Hygiene kits and dignity kits are very important as well. Hygiene kits because, as I said, there was a cholera outbreak in the area, and this is also much needed during an emergency, and dignity kits for the women. Final thing is the mental health support. Again, we should not miss this aspect. Children, young people, women and young girls are all affected. So this is also a huge need. Our partner just started yesterday mobile mental psychosocial support services for children, including young girls. I think everyone is trying their best to respond. Again, I can't talk more maybe about Turkey because we haven't started any response there, but our partners are based in Turkey and operate into cross-border into Syria. And this is where I would like to note that local Syrian organizations who are responding in Syria are already facing losses. Like our partner have lost some of their members, and their members also have lost some of their families or have some of their families missing. So the frontliners and the aid workers, local Syrian organizations are already suffering directly from this, and they are already trying to respond. So one other thing that is needed is like how to exercise our duty of care toward these local organizations that are working on on the ground under very difficult condition. I think support is very much needed at this moment. We could like it is the basic immediate needs. Of course, at one point we will need to think for the medium term and for the longer term and for the recovery. But I think it is too early to speak about that because the current need for immediate assistance is really huge, and we are still in the initial stages of the response. So maybe this is something also to keep in mind and to keep on the table for later, because Syria and Turkey will require a lot of recovery effort to be able to get up again and continue. I'll stop here and thank you again for having me. Happy to answer any questions.
Thanks for that, Racha. You've created a really clear picture for us of what is happening on the ground. And I think that it also paints a very clear picture as to why Emergency Action Alliance is a very comprehensive response. You've talked about a focus on women and girls and refugees, people who were already incredibly vulnerable, now facing a catastrophe like this. And it just means that the breadth of our response means that no one gets forgotten. So thank you for the work that you're doing and for that very detailed overview. So I'd like to now ask David from Care Australia to help give us a sense of the response that Care is conducting in Turkey and Syria and some of the initiatives that are already underway. So over to you, David.
Thanks, Kerren. So I used to actually live in Antakya. I've spent about 5 years in the Middle East, and some of that time was living in Antakya, one of the worst hit cities in southeast Turkey. And what I just wanted to do today was give you a sense of what the situation was like before the earthquake occurred, and then also just to add to the incredible sort of overview that Racha provided in terms of the situation and how we're responding to it. But I did want to just sort of ground all of this by just asking people as they listen to this to just ask themselves the question that if push came to shove, would every person listening to this be able to access, say, $100 or a mobile phone to seek support in the next hour? Because in Australia, the majority of people are going to be able to access something like that or be able to receive assistance from others that are able to support them. In Turkey and in northwest Syria, many of the people impacted by this disaster don't have that opportunity to respond and recover themselves. Obviously, the earthquake has been absolutely devastating, but many of the people that have been impacted are either refugees living in Turkey or they are internally displaced in northwest Syria. And they've been experiencing over a decade of war, and their coping mechanisms have continuously been reduced. So just to give you some statistics to give a sense of how large the scale of this will be, Turkey is the largest host of refugees in the world right now, with 3.7 million refugees registered. Over the last 10 years, many of those refugees have had limited job opportunities. Any savings that they brought across the border have already been exhausted, and we're seeing increasing levels of debt. And the basic services that they're being provided with have been continuously stretched. Similarly, in northwest Syria, you have over 90% of the population relying on humanitarian assistance to meet basic needs. So just to reinforce that we were already looking at a massive humanitarian crisis before this earthquake. And over the last 2 years, that's also been exacerbated by COVID-19 and the subsequent economic downturn, as well as the war in Ukraine, where a lot of the resources that had previously focused on the Syrian conflict have been diverted. Now, in terms of the impact that this earthquake has had, cities like Antakya are made up, and you will have seen this through the sort of images coming through the media, they are made up of thousands and thousands of buildings that are about 6 to 7 stories high, sometimes a little bit higher, and people live in apartments within urban settings. And the timing of this earthquake, very, very early in the morning, meant that the majority of people would have still been in bed. And it's been reported in Türkiye that over 6,000 buildings have collapsed, not just been damaged, but actually collapsed. And you can see those awful pictures of the pancaking that has occurred. And I think what that goes to speak to is the massive scale, both from the deaths. We've spoken about the fact that already we've got over 20,000 deaths recorded, and it's difficult to get a true sense of what's happening inside Syria. But then also that results in tens of thousands of people being injured, as well as many, many more being left homeless or without their belongings. And so we're really looking at this disaster on an unprecedented scale, from both the immediate relief that's required and the life-saving relief that's required, all the way through to how we recover. Because not only do we need to support people in the immediate term, but the likelihood that you would have knock-on impacts and humanitarian crises occurring from this original disaster are really, really high. And that means that we have to respond incredibly quickly. CARE has been operational in the region since 1959. It currently has a program that operates both inside Türkiye as well as providing support in northern Syria. The program is around $70 million in size. So that's about $100 million of programming that's undertaken on an annual basis. And that's really focused on providing for the basic needs of refugees and people that are internally displaced. The response that we're launching off the back of that work will be massive. The teams in country, as well as our local partners, have been massively impacted. And it's really difficult to say. From a CARE perspective, we've already confirmed the loss of 2 colleagues. And I know in many other organizations, it's the same situation. But despite the personal impacts, our teams are already starting to respond. They have close relationships with the Turkish emergency response authorities. We have many local partners, both in Türkiye and northwest Syria. And together we're launching a massive response. Now, we're having to do assessments, we're having to coordinate the work, but we know from experience that people in the immediate term will be looking for shelter, warm food, warm clothes, safe drinking water, and access to basic services such as healthcare. And those will be the types of responses that we'll be immediately providing. Secondary to that, and Racha sort of hinted at this, we'll also be looking at the second phase, where we'll likely be looking at more cash programming. And what that means is essentially saying that as markets restart, we need to inject cash into those markets rather than providing people with physical goods. So we'll provide people with access to cash so that we can get those markets up and running again, and people can actually make choices about exactly what they need to meet their needs. And an example that I always give in this regard is when we hand out kits which have nappies in them, we normally go for one size. And as a dad, you know that kids, they will go through multiple different sizes of nappies, and very often the size that we're providing in those kits can be wrong. So people have to go and make swaps, etc. When they're given cash, they can make those choices. They can support their children themselves. It's a very basic example, but it's one that really brings home why cash will be so important. And then in the long term, there is a real need to support in terms of building back better. Whilst this is an incredibly tragic disaster, there is the opportunity for us to work with communities and work with individuals to support them in accessing economic opportunities, rebuilding their livelihoods, which will enable them to rebuild and recover and increase their resilience so that they're able to cope better in the future with these types of shocks. So CARE will be continuing that response, and we'll be working alongside our partners in the Emergency Action Alliance to really drive that response forward as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, David. It's really good to hear about those stages and the fact that, yes, there's the immediate response, the life-saving, pulling people out of rubble, giving medical assistance to those who have been affected. But then there is what comes next, and that is as big, if not bigger, challenge, I guess. And that is why now is the time for us to raise funds so that over the course of time, it can be allocated to the right staging of the response. And it's great to hear that the focus will be on building back better so that next time, should this happen again, there will be less loss of life. So thank you for giving that really detailed perspective on what's happening. So I want to hand over to Lisa from Australia, from UNHCR, who are launching a huge response to this emergency. And Lisa, from you also, it would be great to hear a sense of what is being done on the ground. This really gives us a great sense of where our money is going. If I donate, what is happening with my money? So really would appreciate your overview.
Thanks very much, Kerren, and thanks for inviting me to participate today. UNHCR teams are present in both Turkey and Syria. We have pre-positioned emergency supplies in both countries, and we're mobilising additional supplies from across the region. In Turkey, UNHCR has 85 staff operating in the affected region, with staff and families who've been affected currently using safe spaces in Gaziantep for temporary accommodation. In Turkey, I think David outlined this really well. The earthquake has affected local residents and refugees alike. As he said, Turkey hosts the largest number of refugees in the world, about 4 million, and the vast majority of them are Syrian. So additionally complex situation that we're dealing with here, but the provinces which have been heavily affected are those where refugees live in high numbers. UNHCR is liaising with Turkish authorities and working with partners and communities to assess the needs. The Turkish government, as you know, is leading the response, and at the request of the government, UNHCR has been providing emergency supplies like mattresses, tents, warm clothing, kitchen sets, all of these supplies ready for distribution. We're also providing tents. UNHCR is disseminating information and messages to communities in multiple languages, obviously many different people there. And so these languages include Arabic, English, Farsi, and Turkish. We're also, as I mentioned at the beginning, mobilising tens of thousands of additional relief items from our existing stockpiles in the country and across the region, because we are going to have to deliver a larger response to address the different needs on the ground. And I absolutely concur with what Racha and David said about the medium and long term. Right now, we're thinking very much about what needs to happen today and tomorrow, but there will be a medium and long-term plan as well. And David talked about cash assistance. For us, that's very important as well, giving people the dignity to make the choices about what they need. So that's likely to be a part of our future plan. In Syria, we're already on the ground there as well. I think Racha just gave an excellent picture of what the situation is there. She said the majority of households there are run by women. As we know, almost 7 million people have been displaced in Syria because of the war, many of them already living in tents and partially destroyed buildings before the earthquake struck. Our own assessments indicate that Aleppo has been the area most affected within government-controlled parts of the country. And if you look at a map, you can see why it's the province that's closest to Turkey. But Hama, Latakia, Tartus, and Idlib are also affected. And as again, Racha outlined very well, this emergency is compounding suffering in a country already devastated by 12 years of war. We're on the ground there through our partners delivering thermal blankets, mattresses and other kinds of aid. We're aiming to get 30,000 winter jackets and clothing kits to Aleppo, Homs and Tartus. I think that's 10,000 to each place. We have 20,000 tents in Damascus in stock, which can be deployed. They'll take 24 hours to get to where they need to go. But obviously, as I said, these are very early days. Like our other friends and colleagues on this call, we'll be developing a larger response plan to address the different needs on the ground as they become more apparent.
Thanks, Lisa. Could I just ask you actually a question about what added complication does winter have in this emergency, and what is being done specifically around the fact that it's freezing conditions there?
Yeah, so a lot of the aid that we are supplying is, as I said, the thermal blankets, tents, things that are going to keep people warm. This just makes the situation much more complex, much more dangerous for people. As I said, people already living in flimsy shelters, in tents, in partially destroyed buildings. It just makes the response that much more difficult, Kerren.
Racha, just from what you've heard then, was there anything that you wanted to add, having heard both David and Lisa speak, anything further that you wanted to add?
No, nothing from my end. I think it was all well covered. Yeah.
So I think that's been quite a comprehensive picture. I haven't seen any questions come up unless Emily, you're seeing them. You're most welcome to ask any questions of our speakers whilst they are here. I think what this represents is a really tangible sense of what is happening with donations right now, and that money is key. Both David and Lisa spoke of cash assistance, providing the dignity for people to make their own choices about what aid they need. Sometimes that's better than a crate of goods when we don't actually know exactly what is needed for that particular group in that particular community. So there's no questions as yet. So what I'll do is I'd like to ask Matthew Maury to actually speak a little about Emergency Action Alliance. Matthew was part of the evolution of EAA. He was one of the early founders. His organisation has been part of the EAA Tearfund from the very beginning. And I guess whether, Matthew, from your perspective as a humanitarian expert, how is this collaboration helping, and how is it going to have impact both in terms of fundraising and coordination on the ground?
Yeah, thanks, Kerren. And actually, I think the stories that Racha, David, and Lisa have shared is the most tangible expression of the impact of the Emergency Action Alliance. Like Kerren said at the outset, a few years ago, 15 agencies came together with some of the best thinkers in the Australian development humanitarian space to say, what would a disruption to philanthropy in Australia look like as we try to grow the pie to raise more money in these big humanitarian crises? How do we collaborate in a way that actually sets aside the competition, sets aside our brands, and says actually our core vision and mission is how do we get humanitarian support and relief to places in greatest need the most efficient way possible. So that's been the vision, and that's been, I guess, the driving force behind the creation of the Emergency Action Alliance. Over the last, we're only a year old. We've actually had 3 launches. We're continuing to learn about how do we effectively collaborate together and how do we achieve these goals. But what we have seen already, and what we're seeing in the crisis in Syria and Turkey, is that having one way for people to give is an incredible benefit to remove the complexity. If the individual Australian is getting messages from 15 agencies, say give to us, give to our agency, or give to our response, it creates a barrier for people who don't know what's the best way to give, what's the best way to respond. So by working as a coalition of 15 agencies, not only can we get one message out there that there's an easy way to give, and it's to the Emergency Action Alliance, and behind that, and you've heard that through the reflections of these three agencies who are on the ground, we are able to then say, these are the agencies best placed to quickly respond to the needs at hand. So that's been the premise. It's about how do we grow the pie and how do we have all boats rise? And over the last year, we've actually, over the first 3 launches, we've had several $1 million raised and a growing awareness of our brand. I would say that for participants on this call, one of the ways you can help us is continue to tell that story. We have several media partners, and with each launch, we're having more opportunity to tell that story and to raise more money. And we invite you to support it as well. And you've heard firsthand the ways that those resources will be used. So it is an innovation. We're going to continue to grow. We're going to continue to learn. And we're going to continue to see how we, in this specific response, can actually raise even more money from the Australian public. So that's a bit of background. I'll leave it there. I'll thank everyone for perhaps a future discussion could be more about the mechanics of the EAA, but really that's not important now. What's important is how do we tell the story about Syria and Turkey. So thank you, Kerren.
Absolutely, Matthew. Thank you for that perspective. We do have a question in from Claire, and Claire asks, in relation to Syria, with limited access to borders from Turkey and a problematic situation with the government, how the funds and resources are able to get in. So perhaps, Lisa, can I throw to you for that?
Yeah, sure, Kerren. It's a really good question. So a couple of days ago, Syria said that aid after the earthquake would reach all of its population, even though Damascus doesn't control all of its territory. Syria's UN envoy has said that Damascus will coordinate to ensure assistance is provided to Syrians in all parts of the country. Today, humanitarian aid in rebel-held areas usually comes through Turkey, thanks to a cross-border mechanism created in 2014 by a UN Security Council resolution, and that allows the UN and its partners to provide aid without the authorization of the Syrian government. There's only one crossing open. There were 4 at one stage, but in more recent times, there's only been one. I believe that, or we have heard reports in the last couple of days that has been blocked. So, you know, that's still to be worked through, but there is that one access point, and there's just that one access point.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And whilst we're waiting for 1 or 2 more questions, I had a question for either David or Anthea, if Anthea is able to speak. I know that you're at an appointment at the moment. And the question's about on-the-ground coordination. When you've got so many agencies all responding to this emergency, you can almost get this sense that it might be a bit chaotic, but I imagine that there's extremely high level of coordination in these environments. So Anthea or David. Maybe David, you're on.
I can jump in. So one of the biggest coordination mechanisms during this type of response to enable the international response to interface with the national and the local response is through the UN cluster system. So I used to work as a logistician. I still do sometimes because I'm part of the World Food Programme Rapid Logistics Cluster team. So when the World Food Programme will be doing all of the logistics cluster work, where basically they bring together all of the logisticians from different organizations to figure out some of these critical access and logistics problems, for example, trucking, shared warehousing, procurement of resources, clearing those through customs and so on and so forth. And that becomes a very, very tight coordination mechanism that brings in the UN, all of the international actors, as well as the government and local actors. And we use that space to really sort of ensure that the items and the response go into where they are needed most. That's like a really small example into, well, it's the logistics cluster is normally very large at this point in time, but that's one part of the response. In all of the different areas in terms of thematic responses from gender or education or health, there's a similar cluster, and those get stood up and all agencies come in, and those responses are undertaken in a really highly coordinated fashion. So you have a lot of communications tools such as the 3 Ws, the who, what, where, so that we can all understand where different agencies are working. We can engage with the agencies where there's crossover, and we can really coordinate the most impactful response possible.
Thank you, David. Another question came through. I might throw this one to Matthew. I think this is one that you'll be able to answer very well on behalf of BAA. As well as triaging resources through the 15 member agencies, how does the EAA coordinate with DFAT and other multilateral development agencies?
Yeah, okay, thanks. I think, I mean, there's two aspects to that question, and David has answered one aspect, which is what does coordination look like on the ground? And as he said, it's the UN cluster system, which is a highly evolved and really effective way for agencies to collaborate and coordinate, ensuring there's not duplication. In terms of on this side, in terms of receiving revenue, DFAT has been a partner with the EAA in our first 2 activations. And we have had a close relationship with them. Actually, they were part of creating the mechanism. They were at the table with us as we were thinking about what it would look like, because they also thought that the Australian landscape, Australian NGO space would benefit from having a collaborative approach to humanitarian response. And so they've been a partner who's been helping us with thinking through how it's been developed and talking along the way, also providing some funding. They are independent from it, but they have been a generous partner. Our vision is actually we get to the point where the EAA brand is well enough known that when there's a humanitarian crisis, the Prime Minister would say, well, for Australians who want to support this crisis, the EAA is the way to give. And we've had good interactions. The Foreign Minister launched the EAA a year ago and have had a lot of support from all sides of government for this model and the mechanism.
Thank you, Matthew. And another question has come through about whether there's any specific skills or personnel needed to provide remote support and or rapidly mobilise. And are there rosters around or platforms or channels where humanitarian personnel who are currently available can register their details? Who can answer that question? Maybe a hands up. So it's about people wanting to help, I guess. And can they register to help?
So I'll just jump in here. It's a little outside probably scope of some of what our agencies are doing. There's an organization called Red R Australia, which is an organization that does have a register of people who can go and provide resourcing and support in humanitarian crises. It's rare that you could just jump straight in to a crisis. Usually there's training and preparation and all those things to ensure that people are well equipped and able to provide resourcing. But you can easily Google them and just understand the pathway if you wanted to become on their list, on their register of volunteers. And I know there's other organizations that have gateways like that. I will say in these crises, usually the worst response is having people who aren't equipped or skilled to go into the situation and try to help. And I know that's not actually what's being said, it's people with skills and how they can be used. But because of the inefficiencies of having volunteers go in, that can be a problem unless it's been coordinated well in advance and they've been prepared. And the other big mistake that often gets made is sending things. You know, people say, well, let's send, tangible things, whether it's blankets or whatever, and they load up a container and they send it. And there's a lot of research over the last few years that the worst thing you can do in a humanitarian situation is actually collect things and send them because of the inefficiencies, because of the wastage, because of the money, because of the distraction. So it's about having a thoughtful approach to that. So I know that's a bit bigger than the question you were asking, but it's probably part of the answer there.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. We have a couple of minutes still to go, so we have the opportunity for our presenters, if there's anything that you've heard or that you feel that you would still like to make reference to, please jump in. We also have Anthea Spinks on the call. She's at the dentist at the moment, but she wanted to be part of this today, and may or may not have the opportunity on this occasion to speak with us. But Anthea is the humanitarian lead at Oxfam, and Oxfam also are responding to this emergency both in Turkey and Syria. So I'm not seeing any Anthea jumping off mute, so I think that what we might do is finish the briefing for now. And I just wanted to say a massive thank you again to AIDN for allowing this opportunity for us to speak to you. We are relatively new as an alliance. We want to model the alliance. We want it to be successful and show that collaboration in the sector is the way forward. And we are extremely pleased, as I said, at the amazing response from everyday Australians to this appeal, where so much, as you've learned today, so much more is needed. So thank you. Simon, I might hand back to you.
Yeah, Kerren, and look, just an opportunity for me just to echo your acknowledgement and thanks, and specifically to Lisa, Matthew, Racha, David, and Anthea, who wasn't able to join us. Just really important for us here in Australia to feel more proximate, feel more informed, and yeah, we're a caring and generous nation, and having an opportunity to feel that our support can be best placed, best triaged, best managed, and considering the immediate short and long-term response that this is going to take, that we have an agency like EAA to sort of smooth things out and sort of bring that layer of coordination in. I think we're all on this learning journey, and we've learned certainly from, you know, what happened with the tsunami, what happened in Haiti, and we continue to sort of build our processes and practices around that. And David, as you say, a lot of this is about bottlenecks, because at the end of the day, this world does not suffer from a lack of resources. We just really are often the most challenges how to get them to where they needed as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And clearly we have the resources here in Australia to be generous and to be considered in our giving as well. I hope the attendees on today's call will find some inspiration in today's message. As I said, we will be sharing a follow-up in the form of a video, and also specific actions and links to the various sites where donors, philanthropists, and funders can sort of get involved and make their contribution to this relief effort. Yeah, and again, thank you for flying the flag in these really difficult war-torn places. I think the message I've certainly taken away is this has really been a perfect storm for one of the most challenging sort of places on earth right now, with winter, conflicts, and pretty much the devastation of significant infrastructure and services, and you know, they deserve our support. So thank you all very much indeed, and yeah, if there's an opportunity to bring another briefing in due course, you know, we'll look forward to that. And until then, all the best for you all around the work you're doing, and please, for those on the line, please consider the EAA and these agencies for your support. Okay, thank you very much.